My ex-wife filed a restraining order. He's a violent monster. She sobbed to the judge. I said nothing, just handed over a sealed envelope. The judge's face turned pale. Bailiff, arrest this woman immediately, he thundered. Ma'am, do you have any idea who your ex-husband really is? The federal agents outside want to know where you hid the... Chapter 1, Facades. The Grand Colonial home in Fairfield County stood as a monument to success and stability. At 42, Gabriel Lynch had cultivated a meticulous image, respected security consultant, devoted husband, pillar of the community. His piercing blue eyes were his most notable feature, simultaneously inviting and unreadable. What few people knew beyond the manicured lawns of this Connecticut suburb was that Gabriel wore many faces. His consulting firm served as a perfect cover for his actual work, handler for an elite division of intelligence operatives. For 15 years he had maintained this double life while building a seemingly perfect marriage with Audrey. Gabe, can you come help with these groceries? Audrey called from the kitchen, her voice carrying the slight southern lilt that had first caught his attention at a fundraiser 7 years ago. Gabriel crossed the polished hardwood floors, observing his wife as she unpacked groceries. Audrey Lynch, with her honey blonde hair and easy smile, had been the perfect partner, sophisticated, intelligent, and able to navigate their social circles with grace. At 38, she maintained the poise that had served her well in her former career as a public relations executive, before opening her own boutique firm. The Westons invited us for dinner Saturday, she said casually. Timothy just got back from his business trip to Brussels. Gabriel nodded, mentally checking the date against his operational schedule. Sounds good, he replied, noting how Audrey's eyes didn't quite meet his. It was a subtle tell he'd noticed more frequently over the past 3 months. Later that night, Gabriel's secure phone vibrated. The message from his agency director was terse. Containment breach. Ghost network. Meet 600. He glanced at Audrey, sleeping, or pretending to sleep beside him. The Ghost network was his most sensitive operation, a web of deep cover informants stretching across 3 continents. A breach meant someone had compromised their communication system. As dawn broke, Gabriel drove to an unmarked office building in New Haven. Inside, Brady Wilson, his supervisor, waited with Fiona Keller, the agency's counterintelligence specialist. Her presence confirmed his fears. They suspected an inside leak. 3 agents exposed in the last month, Brady said, sliding photos across the table. Prague, Ankara, and last night, Buenos Aires. Gabriel studied the images of the dead operatives, faces he knew well, people he had personally recruited and trained. The breach isn't technical, Fiona stated flatly. Someone with clearance is feeding information directly to a foreign handler. We've narrowed it down to 5 possibilities. Gabriel's blood ran cold when Audrey's file appeared on the screen. Your wife's firm took on a new client 3 months ago, Fiona explained. Swiss holding company, very private. They've been channeling unusual payments through her business. For anyone else, the revelation would have been devastating. For Gabriel, it merely confirmed suspicions that had been forming in the recesses of his mind. His marriage, like many of his relationships, had been constructed with precision. Audrey had been vetted, her background scrutinized before he ever asked her to dinner. Yet somehow she had managed to deceive him. We need you to proceed normally, Brady instructed. Monitor, but don't confront. We're tracking her connections. Gabriel nodded, his face betraying nothing of the cold calculation already forming in his mind. In his world, betrayal wasn't met with divorce papers. It was answered with something far more permanent. That evening, Gabriel kissed Audrey on the cheek as she prepared for a client dinner. He watched her check her appearance one final time, applying her signature perfume, the same scent that had lingered in his car after someone had accessed his locked briefcase last month. Don't wait up, she said with a smile that no longer reached her eyes. I won't, Gabriel replied, already planning how he would dismantle her world piece by careful piece. Chapter 2. Shadows. The stale air of the surveillance then clung to Gabriel's shirt as he watched the feed from the camera outside Mayfield's, an upscale restaurant in downtown Hartford. Audrey arrived at 7:30 p.m. elegant, in a black dress he'd given her for her last birthday. She was greeted not by clients, but by Roman Caldwell, a British pharmaceutical executive who had appeared in the periphery of their lives 3 months ago. Well, that's interesting, murmured Fiona, seated beside him. Roman Caldwell has diplomacy credentials, but no actual diplomatic functions. Gabriel's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He's intelligence. Me 6. No, Fiona replied, tapping her tablet. We believe he's operating under non-official cover for a private intelligence firm with ties to several foreign governments. Very mercenary. Through directional microphones, they captured fragments of conversation between Audrey and Roman. Technical terms, dead drops, and security protocols. Audrey was clearly no amateur. The realization settled like ice in Gabriel's veins. Either she had been planted in his life years ago, or she had been turned. While Fiona focused on the technical aspects of the surveillance, Gabriel's mind worked on a different level. The betrayal was professional, but it had become personal the moment Audrey used their marriage as cover. 3 operatives were dead. His operatives. People who had trusted him to keep them safe. The next morning, Gabriel maintained his routine, kissing Audrey goodbye as she left for her office. Once alone, he activated a series of protocols known only to him. Contingencies he had established years ago for a situation he hoped would never materialize. In a secured storage facility registered under an alias, Gabriel accessed a hidden compartment containing documents, cash, weapons and technology not available to the general public. He'd spent years developing autonomous surveillance systems untraceable to any agency. By evening he had deployed microcameras and audio devices throughout their home and Audrey's office. He installed specialized spyware on devices she didn't know he knew about. A second phone kept in her office safe. A laptop hidden beneath the false bottom of her filing cabinet. Gabriel's surveillance revealed the extent of Audrey's operation. She wasn't just passing information about his activities. She had accessed classified files on the Ghost network. Her PR firm served as a communications hub for Roman's network. Most disturbing was the discovery that Roman wasn't working alone. Images from Audrey's hidden laptop revealed the third player. Lewis Parker, Gabriel's longtime friend, and the godfather to children he and Audrey had never had. Lewis, a senior FBI counterintelligence official, had been feeding Audrey information about the agency's investigations. In his basement office, surrounded by monitors displaying the extent of their betrayal, Gabriel felt something shift inside him. The cold, analytical part of his brain, the part that had made him exceptional at his job, took complete control. Emotional attachments had always been liabilities in his line of work. Now he understood why. Gabriel began constructing profiles on everyone in Audrey's operation: habits, weaknesses, pressure points. He identified the full network: Roman, Lewis, Audrey, and 4 others, including Veronica Dale, Gabriel's administrative assistant who had access to his scheduling. As he assembled the pieces, a plan began to form. Not the agency's plan to simply arrest and interrogate, but his own design. These people had not just betrayed national security, they had invaded his life, used his trust, and killed his people. Standard procedures wouldn't satisfy what Gabriel now recognized as a primal need for vengeance. "They think they're hunting me," he whispered to the empty room. "They don't realize they've awakened something much worse." Gabriel understood patience. He had once spent 3 years cultivating an asset in Beijing. He could wait for the perfect moment to dismantle this conspiracy, not just to end it, but to ensure that everyone involved would suffer consequences far beyond what any court could impose. Chapter 3. Counterplay. For 6 weeks, Gabriel lived a carefully choreographed performance. To Audrey, he was the same attentive husband, perhaps slightly more distracted by work pressures. To his agency, he was the diligent officer helping to build a case against his wife and her collaborators. To Brady and Fiona, he appeared appropriately disturbed but professional, compartmentalizing his personal pain to focus on the investigation. None of them saw what was happening beneath the surface. Behind his placid exterior, Gabriel executed the first phase of his plan: isolation. Using encrypted communications that bypassed official channels, he contacted assets who owed him personal favors, people whose names never appeared in any database. Roman Caldwell's operation relied on multiple funding sources. Gabriel systematically targeted each one. A hedge fund manager in London received evidence of financial improprieties that would trigger an automatic audit. A Dubai-based investor suddenly found his visa issues complicated by anonymous tips to immigration authorities. A data breach exposed questionable transactions by a Hong Kong shipping magnate. Within 3 weeks, Roman's operational budget had contracted by 60%. The pressure forced him to accelerate his timeline. Meanwhile, Gabriel introduced subtle inconsistencies into the information Audrey could access. Nothing obvious, just enough to create confusion. When Lewis Parker attempted to verify details through FBI channels, the discrepancies raised internal flags. "Someone's asking questions about our Munich operation," Audrey informed Roman during a meeting Gabriel monitored remotely. "Louis thinks we might have a problem." Roman dismissed her concerns. "We're too close to finishing this. Lynch suspects nothing, and in 2 weeks the Ghost Network will be completely compromised." Their target, Gabriel realized, wasn't just the information he protected. They wanted the encryption algorithms that secured the network, technology that could be worth billions on the black market, while endangering dozens of deep-cover operatives worldwide. Gabriel knew he needed to force their hand. During dinner with Audrey, he casually mentioned an upcoming security conference in Boston, where he would be presenting new communications protocols. "I'll be unveiling some sensitive upgrades," he told her, watching as interest flickered behind her eyes. "The director wants everything locked down tight." Later that night, he monitored as Audrey made a call from her secret phone. "He's moving the timetable up," she told Roman. "We need to accelerate." The following day, Louis invited Gabriel for drinks, something he'd done hundreds of times in their decade-long friendship. This time, Gabriel detected a subtle difference in his manner. Louis was fishing for confirmation about the Boston conference, trying to appear casual while steering the conversation toward security details. Gabriel provided just enough information to seem authentic while setting his trap. He mentioned that complete documentation would be in his secure briefcase during the trip, the final piece his betrayers needed. That night, he received the expected message from Brady. "Surveillance confirms increased activity. We believe they'll move before Boston. Extraction team on standby for your signal." Gabriel sent his acknowledgement, then deleted the exchange. The agency planned to arrest Audrey and her collaborators once they had concrete evidence of espionage. But Gabriel had experienced too many cases where politically connected criminals received reduced sentences or diplomatic interventions. Louis Parker's FBI position virtually guaranteed him special treatment. Justice, Gabriel had learned, was rarely served by the system. 3 days before the Boston conference, Gabriel identified unusual financial transfers between accounts linked to Roman's operation. They were positioning resources for either a major acquisition or an escape. Simultaneously, Audrey began moving personal items to a storage facility, preparing for a swift departure. In their bedroom, Audrey was meticulous about maintaining appearances, still hanging her clothes precisely, still placing her jewelry in the same organized pattern. But Gabriel noticed she had removed several sentimental pieces from her collection, items she would take if she never planned to return. On Wednesday night, Audrey prepared his favorite meal and opened an expensive bottle of wine. Her smile seemed almost genuine as she raised her glass. "To your success in Boston," she toasted. Gabriel clinked his glass against hers. "To getting what we deserve," he replied, watching her closely over the rim of his glass. Later, as they prepared for bed, Gabriel complained of a headache. Expected from the sedative, Audrey had slipped into his wine. He pretended to fall into a heavy sleep while actually neutralizing the drug with a preventative compound he had taken earlier. Through slitted eyes he watched as Audrey carefully checked that he was unconscious, then slipped from the bed. She moved to his office, expertly picking the lock on his briefcase, a skill he had never known she possessed. She photographed documents he had prepared specifically for this moment, then returned everything to its exact position. Gabriel remained motionless as she slipped back into bed, turned away from him, and made a brief call. "It's done," she whispered. "We move tomorrow." Gabriel waited until her breathing indicated sleep, then silently left the bed. In his hidden basement office, he sent a single encrypted message, "Checkmate initiated." By morning the pieces of his true plan were in motion. Chapter 4. Betrayers. Roman Caldwell considered himself a pragmatist in a world of ideologues. Standing in his penthouse overlooking the Hartford skyline, he reviewed the photographs Audrey had obtained from Gabriel's briefcase. The encryption protocols were exactly what his clients had been seeking, worth every penny of the millions they'd promised. "These look legitimate?" he asked Louis Parker, who lounged on the leather sofa, whiskey in hand. Louis nodded, his FBI credentials resting on the coffee table beside him. "Gabriel doesn't create decoys. Too methodical. These are the real algorithms." Roman wasn't entirely convinced. In 15 years of intelligence work, first for Her Majesty's government, then for private interests, he had developed a healthy paranoia, and Lynch still suspects nothing. "Audrey has him completely manipulated," Louis replied. "She says he took the sedative without hesitation." Roman studied the man who had become his most valuable American asset. Louis had approached him 18 months ago, burned out by bureaucracy and tempted by the fortune Roman's employers offered. As assistant director for counterintelligence, Lewis had access to investigations that could threaten their operation and the ability to misdirect them. Speaking of Audrey, Roman said, is she still reliable? 7 years is a long time to maintain a cover marriage. Lewis swirled his whiskey. Audrey goes where the money is. Always has. Before I recruited her for this operation, she was planning to divorce Gabriel anyway. Said living with him was like living with a robot. Roman's phone chimed with a message from Veronica, Gabriel's assistant, confirming his departure for Boston that afternoon. Everything's proceeding as planned, he said. By this time tomorrow, we'll be very wealthy individuals. Across town, Audrey Lynch entered the private vault room at Hartford Trust Bank. Using the key she kept hidden in a hollowed-out makeup compact, she accessed the safe deposit box registered under her maiden name. Inside was everything she needed for her new identity: passport, credit cards, and documentation for accounts in the Cayman Islands. Audrey had spent years preparing for this moment. Her marriage to Gabriel had initially been a means to an end, a long-term intelligence operation targeting his access. She hadn't expected to feel anything for him, and for the first few years she hadn't. Gabriel was handsome and intelligent but emotionally distant, always holding something back. It had made manipulating him easier, but living with him difficult. Roman had offered her a way out and a substantial payday. As she closed the safe deposit box, Audrey felt a momentary pang of something resembling regret. Despite everything, there had been good moments with Gabriel. But she had made her choice long ago when Louis first approached her with evidence of her past financial indiscretions, and offered her an alternative to prosecution. Mrs. Lynch, the bank manager interrupted her thoughts. There's a call for you at the front desk. They say it's urgent. Audrey followed him to the desk, where she took the receiver. Hello? The operation is compromised. The voice belonged to Veronica, Gabriel's assistant and their inside source at his agency. Gabriel never boarded the plane to Boston, and 2 of our funding sources have been frozen. We need to move to the contingency plan. Audrey's heart raced. What about Louis and Roman? I can't reach them. Meet at the secondary location in 1 hour. The line went dead, leaving Audrey with a growing sense of dread. She tried calling Roman, then Louis, receiving no answer from either. As she drove toward the rendezvous point, an abandoned manufacturing facility outside the city, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Meanwhile, Roman received similar news from another source. Standing on his penthouse balcony, he ended the call and turned to Louis. We've got a problem. Gabriel's agency is mobilizing teams, and our accounts in Singapore and Zurich have been frozen. Louis paled. How? The operation was airtight. Apparently not, Roman replied coldly. Collect what you need. We're moving to the contingency location. As they prepared to leave, the elevator to Roman's penthouse activated. Both men drew weapons instinctively. Are you expecting someone? Louis whispered. Roman shook his head, moving silently toward the security monitor. The elevator camera showed an empty car ascending to their floor. When the doors opened, no one emerged. Instead, a small metallic sphere rolled into the apartment, releasing a dense white smoke. Louis fired blindly into the cloud while Roman moved toward the emergency exit. Neither man made it more than 3 steps before the paralyzing agent took effect. As consciousness faded, Roman glimpsed a figure in a gas mask emerging from the smoke. The last thing he heard was a familiar voice. Hello, Roman. We have a lot to discuss. Across town, Audrey arrived at the rendezvous location, finding it deserted. She checked her watch. She was right on time. Where was Veronica? Her phone rang with an unknown number. Where are you? She demanded. Hello, Audrey. The voice froze her in place. Gabriel. I believe you're looking for Veronica. She's indisposed at the moment. Gabriel, I can explain. I'm sure you can, he replied, his tone conversational. You've always been excellent at explaining things, like why you needed access to my briefcase, or why you've been meeting with Roman Caldwell for the past 3 months. Audrey's training kicked in. Whatever you think is happening, you're wrong. I've been working an angle for the agency undercover, ask Brady. Brady doesn't know, Gabriel interrupted. Few people do. That's the point of a ghost operation, isn't it? Complete deniability. A chill ran through Audrey as the implications settled in. How long have you known? Long enough. The question now isn't what I know, but what happens next. Audrey reached for the gun in her purse. I want to meet. Just us. I thought you might, Gabriel replied. There's a package in the trunk of your car with instructions. Follow them precisely if you want to see Roman and Louis alive again. The line went dead. Audrey rushed to her car, finding a sealed envelope containing a burner phone, a Bluetooth earpiece, and a typed note. Drive north on Route 91. Put in the earpiece. Answer when I call. Come alone, or they die first. Audrey's hand trembled as she started the car. In 7 years, she had never seen this side of Gabriel. She had always assumed his compartmentalized emotional state made him vulnerable. Now she realized it made him dangerous. As she merged onto the highway, the phone rang. I'm driving north as instructed, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Good, Gabriel replied. Let's talk about what you really want, Audrey. It's not just the encryption algorithms, is it? Audrey weighed her options. Denial seemed pointless now. The algorithms are just the beginning. What we're really after is access to the entire Ghost network, all your deep cover operatives worldwide. And why would Roman's employers want that? Because your ghosts have been interfering with their business for years. Arms shipments intercepted. Terrorist financing disrupted. They're tired of it. Gabriel was silent for a moment. Take the next exit and follow the GPS coordinates being sent to the phone. 30 minutes later, Audrey arrived at an isolated cabin surrounded by dense forest. With the gun concealed in her jacket, she approached cautiously, finding the door unlocked. Inside, she discovered Roman and Louis bound to chairs, conscious but disoriented. Gabriel sat calmly in an armchair across from them, no weapon visible. Welcome to the family reunion, he said, gesturing to an empty chair. Have a seat. We have so much to discuss. Chapter 5. Exposed. 7 years of marriage, Gabriel said conversationally. And I never knew you could pick a lock, Audrey. That's quite a skill for a PR executive. Audrey remained standing, her hand near the concealed weapon. There's a lot we didn't know about each other, Gabriel nodded thoughtfully. Apparently so. For instance, I didn't realize my wife was recruited by my best friend to spy on me. He glanced at Louis, who strained against his restraints, or that my trusted FBI counterpart was selling access to the highest bidder. Gabriel, Louis began. This isn't what it looks like. Gabriel interrupted. It's exactly what it looks like. Treason wrapped in betrayal, packaged with a personal touch. He turned his attention back to Audrey. The gun in your jacket won't help. Please, sit. Audrey slowly took the seat, calculating her options. Gabriel seemed different. His usual controlled demeanor replaced by something more unpredictable. What do you want? Roman finally spoke, his British accent more pronounced under stress. Gabriel smiled without warmth. Interesting question from the man who's been trying to dismantle my operation, but fair enough. He stood and walked to a laptop on a nearby table. I want to understand the full scope of your betrayal before I decide what to do about it. He turned the screen toward them, displaying surveillance photos of their meetings, transcripts of calls, and financial records tracing money from foreign sources to shell companies they controlled. Quite thorough, Roman admitted, professional admiration briefly overriding his predicament. But if you already know everything, why this theatrical gathering? Because information is only part of the equation, Gabriel replied. I want to hear you say it. I want to know why. Louis scoffed. Why does anyone do anything? Money. Power. The agency buries people like us in bureaucracy while the world burns. Roman's employers understand value. Gabriel studied his former friend. And the operatives who died because of your leaks? Were they acceptable collateral damage? For the first time, Audrey looked confused. What operatives? 3 agents from my network were captured and executed in the past month, Gabriel said quietly. Prague, Ankara, Buenos Aires, people I recruited, people I promised to protect. Audrey turned to Roman, who avoided her gaze. You said no one would get hurt. That was our agreement. Roman shrugged as much as his restraints allowed. Business necessities. Their identities were leveraged to establish our credibility. Gabriel observed the dynamic with interest. You didn't know, Audrey? Your partners sacrificed lives to advance their timeline. Don't act self-righteous, Roman interjected. Your precious agency has sacrificed plenty of lives when convenient. We're all playing the same game. Gabriel's expression hardened. No, we're not. And that's a distinction you'll soon appreciate. He pressed a button on the laptop and screens embedded in the walls activated, displaying video feeds of various locations. Roman's penthouse being searched by federal agents. The offices of Audrey's PR firm surrounded by FBI vehicles. Louis's home as his wife was escorted out by authorities. What have you done? Louis demanded, struggling against his restraints. I've simply shared some of our information with official channels, Gabriel explained. Your homes, offices, and known associates are being investigated as we speak. Your assets are frozen. Your contacts are being arrested across 3 continents. Roman maintained his composure. Impressive theater, but we all know how this ends. I have diplomatic protection. Lewis has FBI connections who'll intervene. Even your wife will likely cut a deal. We'll face some inconvenience, perhaps a few years of minimum security confinement, then quietly resume our lives. Gabriel leaned forward. That's where you're wrong. You see, the evidence being collected isn't going to law enforcement. It's going to people with more direct methods of handling betrayal. He pulled out a phone and played a recording of Roman discussing the deaths of the 3 operatives, followed by details of weapons shipments his employers had facilitated to terrorist groups in Africa and Southeast Asia. Copies of this are being delivered to every intelligence agency and criminal organization your operation has crossed, Gabriel explained. People who don't care about diplomatic immunity or FBI connections. People who solve problems permanently. For the first time, fear flashed across Roman's face. You're bluffing. Even you wouldn't unleash that kind of chaos. 3 weeks ago, I might have agreed with you, Gabriel replied. But that was before I found 3 of my agents dead because of your greed. The cabin fell silent as the implications settled over them. Audrey was the first to speak. What about me? She asked quietly. Am I included in this distribution list of yours? Gabriel studied his wife, the woman who had shared his bed while plotting his professional destruction. That depends on what happens next. He stood and moved to a cabinet, retrieving 3 folders, which he placed on the table. Inside each folder is a complete confession detailing your involvement in this conspiracy, your knowledge of the operatives' deaths, and your connections to various terrorist financiers. Sign them, and I ensure they go to American authorities only. Refuse, and your files join Roman's international distribution. Lewis stared at the folders. You expect us to confess to crimes we haven't even been charged with? No lawyer would advise that. I'm not offering legal advice, Gabriel replied. I'm offering a choice between American federal prison and something far worse. Roman's employers don't tolerate loose ends, especially ones that can testify against them. Roman's composure finally cracked. You sanctimonious bastard. You think this protects you? There are others who'll finish what we started. Gabriel nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps, but they'll have to do it without you. He checked his watch. You have 5 minutes to decide. After that I make the call, and certain interested parties in Moscow, Beijing, and Riyadh learn exactly how you've been manipulating their operations. The room fell silent save for the ticking of an old clock on the mantelpiece. Audrey stared at the folder in front of her, then at Gabriel. Was any of it real? She asked quietly. Us. Something flickered in Gabriel's eyes, a brief glimpse of the man she had married. Then it vanished, replaced by cold determination. You tell me, he replied. Was any of it real for you? Audrey held his gaze for a long moment before looking away. Without another word, she opened her folder and signed a confession. Lewis followed reluctantly, muttering about coercion and legal challenges. Roman held out the longest, his calculating mind clearly searching for alternatives before finally acknowledging defeat. As Gabriel collected the signed documents, the cabin's door opened. Fiona Keller entered with 2 federal agents, their expressions grim. Right on time, Gabriel said, handing her the confessions. They've admitted to everything. Fiona nodded to the agents who moved to secure the prisoners. The evidence teams have already found corroborating documentation at all 3 residences. She glanced at Lewis with particular disgust. Director Peterson wants to personally oversee his former colleagues' processing. As they were led away, Audrey paused beside Gabriel. This isn't over. You know that, right? Gabriel met her gaze steadily. For you, it is. After they departed, Fiona turned to Gabriel. The agency wants you back at headquarters for debriefing. Gabriel shook his head. Not yet. There's still one loose, and to address. Fiona studied him carefully. Official channels only from here, Gabriel. The director was clear. Of course, he replied with a thin smile. Just some personal matters to settle first. Once alone, Gabriel returned to the laptop, accessing a secure channel that wouldn't appear in any agency logs. The face that appeared on screen belonged to a man known in certain circles only as the contractor. The packages are ready for delivery, Gabriel informed him. Proceed as discussed. The man nodded once before the connection terminated. Gabriel closed the laptop and gazed out the window at the darkening forest. His agency would get their confessions and convictions. Justice would be served through official channels. But for the 3 operatives whose bodies had been returned in diplomatic pouches, for the years of lies in his own home, for the subversion of everything he had worked to protect, for that, Gabriel had arranged a different kind of reckoning. He poured himself a whiskey and waited for night to fall. Chapter 6: Consequences. 3 weeks after the arrests, Gabriel sat in the director's office at agency headquarters, listening as Peterson described the fallout from what was now being called the Caldwell conspiracy. Lewis Parker is cooperating fully, Peterson explained. His testimony has already led to the identification of 12 foreign assets embedded in various agencies. Gabriel nodded, maintaining the professional demeanor expected of him. And Roman Peterson's expression darkened. Caldwell is proving more resistant. His diplomatic connections have secured him certain privileges during detention. Not surprising, Gabriel commented. And Audrey, your wife, Peterson said carefully, has requested a meeting with you. Her attorney believes she can offer additional information in exchange for considerations at sentencing. Gabriel kept his face neutral. I'll take it under advisement. After the briefing, Fiona walked with Gabriel toward the parking garage. Are you actually considering meeting with her? She asked once they were alone. I haven't decided, Gabriel replied, though they both knew it was a lie. The psychological evaluation team is concerned about your state of mind, Fiona said bluntly. They've recommended extended leave. Gabriel smiled faintly. And what do you recommend? Fiona studied him before answering. I think you've compartmentalized this situation like you do everything else. I think you're functioning perfectly well professionally, and I think that terrifies them. But not you. I've worked with you long enough to understand that your emotional control isn't a deficiency, it's a tool. She paused at the garage entrance. Just be careful that tool doesn't become a weapon you can't put down. That evening, Gabriel drove to the Federal Detention Center where Audrey awaited trial. In the sterile visitation room, she looked smaller somehow. The confident woman he had married diminished by prison garb and the weight of her circumstances. Thank you for coming, she said, as he took the seat across from her. My lawyer said you've refused previous requests. I've been busy, Gabriel replied. Cleaning up the aftermath tends to be time-consuming. Audrey folded her hands on the table. I have information. Names, contacts, operational details that weren't in my confession. And in exchange, you want what? A reduced sentence? Witness protection. I want to explain, she said quietly. Not to justify what I did, but so you understand how it happened. Gabriel studied her face, searching for the manipulation he had come to expect. Instead, he found something that looked remarkably like genuine regret. I'm listening, he said finally. Audrey took a deep breath. I was facing federal charges for financial improprieties at my previous firm before we met. Lewis approached me with an offer. Work with him to gather intelligence on certain targets, and the charges would disappear. She met his gaze. You weren't the original target. That came later, after we were already married. And you never considered coming to me? Gabriel asked, his voice carefully controlled. By then, I was already compromised. Louis had evidence of my initial cooperation. She looked down at her hands, and yes, part of it was the money. Roman promised enough to disappear permanently. Start fresh with him? Gabriel asked, the question surprising them both. Audrey shook her head. No, Roman was business only. She hesitated. I had planned to go alone. Despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to. She trailed off. To what? To watch what they planned to do to you once they had what they needed. She finished quietly. Gabriel absorbed this information, filing it away with everything else he had learned about the woman he had shared his life with. The operatives who died, he said finally. Did you know about them beforehand? No. Audrey answered immediately. That was Roman's decision. When I found out, I threatened to walk away. He convinced me it was too late. That we were all implicated. Gabriel nodded slightly. It aligned with what he had observed during the confrontation at the cabin. Your confession mentioned a Swiss account number that wasn't in our records, he said, changing direction. Why include it? Audrey met his gaze directly. Because it contains evidence against people even Roman was afraid of. Information I compiled as insurance. The access codes are in a safety deposit box under my mother's maiden name at First Colonial Bank in Richmond. Gabriel considered her carefully. Why give this to me now? Because 3 people are dead because of an operation I was part of, she replied. Whatever my reasons, whatever sentence I serve, that doesn't balance the scale. For a moment Gabriel glimpsed the woman he thought he had married, principled despite her flaws, capable of genuine remorse. It changed nothing about what she had done, but it complicated the narrative he had constructed. "I'll look into it," he said finally, standing to leave. "Gabriel," Audrey called as he reached the door. "There's something else you should know about Roman's employers." Gabriel turned back. "They call themselves the Deadless Group," she continued. "And they've already sent someone to replace Roman, a woman named Eleanor Vance. She arrived in Washington last week." Gabriel's expression revealed nothing, but internally, he filed this information alongside the other pieces of the puzzle he was assembling. "Goodbye, Audrey," he said, knowing it would likely be the last time they spoke. Outside the detention center, Gabriel sat in his car processing the conversation. The information about the Swiss account and Eleanor Vance could prove valuable, but it wasn't why he had finally agreed to meet with Audrey. He had needed to look into her eyes one last time to be certain of his course. The regret he had seen there was genuine, he believed. But so was the calculation. Even now, she was positioning herself, leveraging what information she had left for whatever advantage it might yield. His phone chimed with a message from an encrypted channel, package delivered in London. Proceeding to Dubai and Hong Kong per instructions, Gabriel deleted the message. The packages were evidence files on Roman's financial backers delivered not to authorities but to rival criminal organizations with reasons to eliminate those involved. Within days, Roman's support network would be dismantled in ways no legal system could accomplish. As for Roman himself, Gabriel had ensured that certain inmates at the Federal Detention Center received information about Roman's role in exposing undercover operations that had sent some of their associates to prison. Justice would find Roman long before his case reached trial. Next came Lewis. As the FBI's former assistant director for counterintelligence, he had made many enemies within the intelligence community. Several of those enemies now had detailed files documenting how Lewis had compromised their operations, endangered their agents, and profited from their losses. His protection within the system was eroding by the hour. And finally, there was Audrey. Despite everything, Gabriel had arranged for her to receive the most conventional justice, a federal trial, testimony against bigger targets, and eventual incarceration at a minimum security facility. Not out of lingering affection but because her betrayal, while profound, had limits she had not crossed. Gabriel started his car and headed not toward his empty house in Connecticut, but to a private airfield outside the city. The agency believed he was taking leave to process his personal trauma. In reality, he was pursuing the lead Audrey had provided. Eleanor Vance, the Deadless Group, new players in a game that had just become personal. As his plane lifted off, Gabriel reviewed what he knew about Deadless from fragmented intelligence reports, a shadow organization connecting government officials, intelligence operatives and criminal enterprises across borders. An organization that had infiltrated his life once and would undoubtedly try again. This time, however, Gabriel wasn't just a target. He was a hunter with nothing left to lose. And as the three operatives who had died in Prague, Ankara and Buenos Aires could have attested, Gabriel Lynch protected his own. The agency wanted him to heal, to process, to return to normal operations. What they didn't understand was that normal no longer existed for him. In its place was something colder, more focused, and infinitely more dangerous. The game wasn't over. It had merely evolved. Chapter 7, Courtroom. "My ex-wife filed a restraining order," Gabriel stated calmly to his attorney as they prepared for the hearing. 6 months had passed since the arrests. Months, Gabriel had spent systematically dismantling the Deadless Group's operations across 3 continents. Eleanor Vance had proven elusive, but not invisible. Using Audrey's Swiss account information, Gabriel had traced financial connections to diplomatic and intelligence circles in 12 countries. One by one, he had exposed compromised officials, leaked evidence of criminal activities to rival organizations, and created chaos within Daedalus's carefully structured network. Now he was back in Connecticut, responding to Audrey's latest maneuver, a restraining order filed from federal prison, claiming she feared for her life upon eventual release. "This is a tactical move," explained Marjorie Walsh, Gabriel's attorney. "She's positioning for her sentencing hearing next month. A restraining order supports her claim that she acted under duress from you throughout the conspiracy." Gabriel nodded. She always was good at creating narratives. The courtroom was mostly empty when they entered. A minor hearing in what the public believed was simply a divorce proceeding between a security consultant and his unfaithful wife. Only a handful of people knew the classified details of the Caldwell conspiracy. Judge Walter Friedman entered, a stern man with a reputation for by-the-book proceedings. After preliminary instructions, Audrey's attorney presented their case, painting Gabriel as a controlling, potentially violent husband who had manipulated his vulnerable client into criminal behavior. "He's a violent monster." Audrey sobbed dramatically when called to testify. "I lived in fear every day. The things he made me do, the people he threatened." She broke down, her performance impressive even to Gabriel, who had seen her genuine emotions enough to recognize the difference. Her attorney presented evidence of Gabriel's supposedly violent tendencies, carefully edited emails, statements from friends who had observed his controlling behavior, and psychological evaluations suggesting his compartmentalized emotional state indicated potential sociopathic tendencies. When Gabriel's turn came, his attorney began a methodical dismantling of Audrey's claims. Former colleagues testified to his professional conduct. Friends described his measured temperament. Finally, Gabriel himself took the stand, his demeanor calm and collected, which Audrey's attorney immediately tried to use against him. "Mr. Lynch, your wife has described living in terror of your unpredictable anger, yet you sit here showing no emotion whatsoever. Doesn't that support her characterization of your abnormal emotional control?" Gabriel met the attorney's gaze steadily. "I believe in facts, counselor. Emotional displays don't serve the truth." "And what is the truth, Mr. Lynch?" "That your wife betrayed you. So you systematically destroyed her life." "Objection." Gabriel's attorney interjected. "Argumentative. Sustained." Judge Friedman ruled. "Counsel, confine yourself to questions relevant to the restraining order." Audrey's attorney shifted tactics. "Mr. Lynch, isn't it true that you personally orchestrated the investigation that led to your wife's arrest?" "I reported suspicious activities to appropriate authorities as any citizen should," Gabriel replied evenly. "And isn't it also true that since her incarceration, 3 people connected to her case have died under mysterious circumstances?" Gabriel's attorney objected again, but Gabriel raised his hand slightly. "I'd like to answer that, Your Honor." Judge Friedman nodded cautiously. "Roman Caldwell was killed in a prison altercation by inmates with connections to operations he compromised. Lewis Parker apparently committed suicide while awaiting trial, though his death remains under investigation. And Viktor Zuboff, a financial backer of their operation, died in what Dubai authorities ruled a boating accident." Gabriel's voice remained perfectly measured. "I was not present for any of these events, nor did I have any direct involvement in them." Technically true, though Gabriel had ensured that information about Roman reached certain inmates, had leaked evidence of Lewis's cooperation to dangerous former targets, and had anonymously provided Zuboff's location to a rivaling criminal faction. The attorney pressed on. "Quite a coincidence that everyone who betrayed you is met with tragedy. Doesn't that pattern support my client's fear for her safety?" "I said nothing," Gabriel replied, his voice finally showing a hint of emotion. "When my wife betrayed not just me but national security, I pursued justice through proper channels. The consequences others faced came from their own actions and enemies they made long before I entered the picture." The questioning continued for another hour before Judge Friedman called a recess. As court officers escorted Audrey back toward the holding area, she passed close enough to Gabriel to whisper, "You think you've won, but you have no idea what's coming." When court reconvened, Gabriel's attorney presented their final evidence. A sealed envelope delivered to the judge. "Your Honor, this contains classified information cleared for your review by federal authorities. It documents the full extent of Mrs. Lynch's involvement in an espionage conspiracy, and demonstrates that her current claims are part of a documented pattern of manipulation." The judge's face turned pale as he reviewed the contents. The envelope contained not just the official case files, but additional evidence Gabriel had gathered independently. Recordings of Audrey discussing the restraining order strategy with another inmate, planning to leverage it for sentencing considerations. "Bailiff, arrest this woman immediately." Judge Friedman thundered, clearly disturbed by what he had read. "The court finds these restraining order claims not only baseless, but fraudulent, constituting perjury and contempt of court." Audrey's composed facade crumbled as she realized her miscalculation. "You don't understand," she protested as the bailiff approached. "He's not who you think he is." "Ma'am, do you have any idea who your ex-husband really is?" the judge asked sternly, referencing the decorated service record included in the classified file. "The federal agents outside want to know where you hid the documentation related to your overseas accounts and remaining conspirators." As Audrey was led away, her eyes locked with Gabriel's. In that moment, she finally understood. The man she had betrayed had been methodically not just legal justice, but a comprehensive destruction of everyone involved in the conspiracy. Outside the courthouse, Fiona Keller waited beside a black SUV. "That's the last loose end from the original case," she said, as Gabriel approached. The director will be relieved. Gabriel nodded, scanning the perimeter out of habit. And Eleanor Vance, still in wind, Fiona replied. But her operation is crippled. The intelligence you've provided has led to arrests in 6 countries. What neither of them said aloud was that much of that intelligence had been obtained through methods the agency would never officially sanction. Methods that left no evidence connecting Gabriel to them. The director has authorized your return to active status, Fiona continued. There's a situation developing in Malaysia that requires your expertise. Gabriel considered the offer. His personal vendetta had consumed him for months. But with Audrey's final plane neutralized, perhaps it was time to return to the work that had defined his life before the betrayal. I'll need a few days to settle some personal matters, he replied. Fiona nodded, understanding the subtext. Of course, just be sure those matters don't appear in any official reports. As the SUV pulled away, Gabriel's secure phone vibrated with an encrypted message, target located Zurich. Awaiting instructions, Eleanor Vance had finally surfaced. The last architect of the conspiracy that had killed his operatives and invaded his life was within reach. Gabriel made his decision. The agency could wait. First, he would complete what he had started. Not for country or cause, but for the 3 agents who had died trusting in his protection. For them, he would ensure that the Deadless group understood a fundamental truth. Gabriel Lynch did not forgive, and he never, ever forgot. Chapter 8, Hunted. The Bauer Alack Hotel in Zurich catered to the world's elite, promising both luxury and discretion. In the presidential suite, Eleanor Vance reviewed the latest intelligence on what remained of the Deadless group's operation. At 45, she had navigated the shadows between government intelligence and private enterprise for over 2 decades, accumulating power, wealth, and dangerous secrets. What she hadn't anticipated was Gabriel Lynch. Our asset in Washington confirms Lynch has gone off-grid, reported Carl Weber, her head of security. Agency records show him on approved leave, but no electronic trace of his movements in the past 72 hours. Eleanor closed the laptop, displaying the decimated remnants of her network. He's coming for me. It wasn't a question. Since the collapse of Roman's operation, Lynch had systematically targeted every level of deadlifts, from financial backers to field operatives. Not through direct action. He was too skilled for that. But through a devastating campaign of information warfare, turning enemies against each other, exposing vulnerabilities to precisely the wrong people. We've tripled security and restricted all access to this floor, Carl assured her. The helicopter remains on standby for immediate evacuation. Eleanor nodded absently, her mind already calculating contingencies. Lynch had proven more dangerous than anyone anticipated. Roman and Lewis had described him as brilliant but predictable, bound by agency protocols and moral constraints. The man who had dismantled her organization over the past 6 months observed no such limitations. What do we know about his methodology? She asked. Carl consulted his tablet. He never confronts targets directly. Instead, he manipulates circumstances to make them vulnerable to existing threats. Roman was killed by inmates with connections to operations he compromised. Lewis Parker apparently committed suicide after evidence of his cooperation was leaked to former targets. Not suicide, Eleanor corrected. Lynch made it look that way. Possibly, Carl acknowledged. The pattern suggests Lynch identifies his target's greatest vulnerability, then creates conditions for that vulnerability to become fatal. Eleanor considered this assessment. And what would he consider my greatest vulnerability? Carl hesitated before answering. Your former association with German intelligence. Specifically, Operation Shadowfall. The name sent a chill through Eleanor. Shadowfall had been her first major operation for Daedalus, transitioning assets and information from her government position to private enterprise. It had also involved eliminating 3 fellow agents who threatened to expose her. The deaths had been ruled accidents, but certain people in Berlin still harbored suspicions. Increase security and prepare the contingency protocols, she instructed. We moved to the secondary location at dawn. As Carl departed, Eleanor poured herself a drink and moved to the window overlooking Lake Zurich. The night lights reflected off the water's surface, creating an illusion of serenity that contrasted sharply with her growing unease. Lynch had proven himself not just an adversary but a force of nature, methodical, patient, and seemingly omniscient. Every defense she had erected, he had circumvented. Every ally she had called upon, he had neutralized. For the first time in decades, Eleanor Vance felt genuine fear. 15 kilometers away, in a modest apartment rented under an alias, Gabriel prepared for the endgame of his personal crusade. The walls displayed photos, documents, and connection maps detailing Eleanor Vance's operation. her security personnel, her movements over the past decade. Most importantly, they documented Operation Shadowfall. The information he had extracted from files in the Swiss account Audrey had revealed, the operation that would prove to be Eleanor's undoing. Gabriel's phone rang with a secured connection. The Berlin package was delivered, reported the contractor. Recipients were appropriately disturbed by its contents. And our mutual friend in Swiss banking? He confirmed Vance accessed her emergency accounts this morning. She's preparing to move. Gabriel nodded to himself. Maintain surveillance. Report any departure preparations. After ending the call, Gabriel returned to his preparations. The Berlin package contained evidence of Eleanor's involvement in the deaths of 3 German intelligence agents 15 years earlier. Evidence delivered not to authorities, but to the victims' former colleagues who had long suspected foul play. Meanwhile, across Zurich, 3 black vehicles pulled up outside the Bow of Loch. The men who emerged wore no uniforms or identification, but their purposeful movement and coordinated approach suggested professional training. In the hotel security center, Carl noticed the arrivals on the monitors, possible hostiles approaching the main entrance. He reported to Eleanor via secure comm. Identification? She demanded. Already moving toward her packed go-back negative, but they matched the profile of German federal police. Facial recognition is running. Eleanor felt the trap closing. Activate evacuation protocol. Meet me at the service elevator. As she gathered essential items, her secure phone chimed with an incoming message. The sender was unknown, but the content froze her in place. A single image of her meeting with the 3 German agents before their deaths, followed by text in German "Justice remembers." In that moment, Eleanor understood. Lynch hadn't come for her personally. He had simply ensured that her past would. When Carl arrived at her suite, Eleanor was already changing plans. The service exit is compromised. We need an alternative route. The northeast fire escape leads to the parking garage, Carl suggested. We have a vehicle positioned there. They moved swiftly through the hotel's service corridors. Carl taking point while Eleanor followed, her mind racing to identify how Lynch had outmaneuvered her so completely. The answer came as they reached the garage level. Standing beside their escape vehicle was a man Eleanor recognized from intelligence briefings. Not Gabriel Lynch, but Howard Barnes, Lynch's former mentor and current director of special operations, Miss Vance. Barnes greeted her calmly. I believe we have matters to discuss regarding certain compromised operations. Eleanor assessed the situation instantly. This wasn't Lynch's endgame. It was the beginning of an official operation. The private vendetta had seamlessly transitioned into government action. Director Barnes, she replied, maintaining her composure. I assume you have proper jurisdiction for this conversation? Joint task force with our German colleagues, Barnes explained. They're particularly interested in discussing Operation Shadowfall with you. As if on cue, the elevator behind them opened to reveal the men who had entered the hotel, indeed German federal agents, now accompanied by Swiss authorities. Carl reached for his weapon, but Eleanor stopped him with a slight gesture. That would only accelerate the inevitable, she said quietly. As the agents approached, Eleanor's phone received one final message. Ghost Network sends regards. Miles away, Gabriel watched the operation unfold through encrypted feeds. Barnes had been skeptical when first approached with the Shadowfall evidence, but the documentation had proven irrefutable. More importantly, it had opened doors to international cooperation in dismantling what remained of Daedalus. Gabriel's personal vendetta had evolved into something larger, a sanctioned operation to eliminate a threat not just to him but to multiple intelligence agencies. As he observed Eleanor Vance being escorted to a secure vehicle, Gabriel felt not satisfaction but a quiet sense of completion. The operatives who had died in Prague, Ankara, and Buenos Aires had been avenged. The organization that had invaded his life had been dismantled. The betrayers had faced consequences far beyond what any court could impose. Yet beneath that resolution lay something hollow. The recognition that vengeance, however complete, offered no true restoration. The life he had believed in, the marriage he had invested in, the trust he had extended, none could be recovered. Gabriel closed the feeds and began methodically erasing all evidence of his off-books operation. Tomorrow, he would report for assignment in Malaysia, resuming the professional identity that had always defined him. The handler would return to handling assets, managing operations, protecting his network. The personal reckoning was complete. But as Gabriel packed away the last traces of his private crusade, he knew something fundamental had changed. The betrayal had stripped away illusions he had maintained about himself. That his compartmentalized emotional state was a professional tool rather than a defensive mechanism. That his calculated approach to relationships was a choice rather than a necessity. Gabriel Lynch had always been the man who arranged consequences for others while remaining untouched himself. Now he understood that his greatest deception had been believing he was immune to the cost of those arrangements. As night settled over Zurich, Gabriel departed the apartment, leaving no trace of his presence. His phone received one final update from Barnes. Subject secured. Operation concluded. With that confirmation, Gabriel closed the chapter on the most personal operation of his career. The handler had done what handlers do: identified threats, neutralized risks, protected assets. The fact that those assets had included his own sense of justice was a detail that would appear in no official report. Chapter 9. Resolution. 6 months after Eleanor Vance's arrest, Gabriel stood on the observation deck of Marina Bay Sands in Singapore, watching the city lights reflect off the water 37 stories below. His assignment in Malaysia had expanded into a regional operation, rebuilding intelligence networks compromised during the Daedalus affair. "Beautiful view," commented a familiar voice behind him. Gabriel turned to find Director Howard Barnes, unexpected but not unwelcome. "I wasn't aware you were in Singapore." "Just arrived," Barnes replied, joining him at the railing. "The President's intelligence briefing mentioned your work here. Impressive results." Gabriel nodded slightly, accepting the compliment with characteristic reserve. "The regional networks are stabilizing. Another month should complete the reconstruction." Barnes studied his protégé, noting the subtle changes that even Gabriel's legendary self-control couldn't entirely conceal. New lines around the eyes, a certain watchfulness that hadn't been there before. "The Daedalus trials begin next week," Barnes said, changing subjects. "Eleanor Vance has negotiated limited immunity in exchange for information on government penetrations in 3 countries. "Expected," Gabriel replied. "She always positioned herself with leverage. Your ex-wife's sentencing is also scheduled. Minimum security with potential for early release based on cooperation." Gabriel's expression revealed nothing. "Also expected." Barnes turned to face him directly. "The agency's psych evaluation recommended your return to headquarters. Administrative duties. Training new handlers. They believe field operations may be problematic given recent personal traumas." A flash of something, perhaps amusement, perhaps defiance, crossed Gabriel's features. "And what do you believe, Howard?" "I believe you're the most effective operative I've ever worked with," Barnes answered honestly. "I also believe the events of the past year changed you in ways our psych department isn't equipped to evaluate." Gabriel considered this assessment. "And those changes concern you?" "They should concern you," Barnes replied. "The line between justice and vengeance isn't just ethical philosophy, Gabriel. It's the difference between an operative who serves a purpose and one who becomes a liability." The implied question hung between them. Had Gabriel crossed that line during his personal campaign against Daedalus? "The operations were sanctioned," Gabriel pointed out. "Results documented. Objectives achieved." "The operations, yes," Barnes acknowledged. "But we both know there were parallel efforts. Efforts that yielded convenient circumstances. Roman Caldwell's death in custody. Lewis Parker's apparent suicide. Victor Zubov's boating accident." Gabriel's gaze returned to the Singapore skyline. "Coincidences happen in our line of work. Too many coincidences become patterns," Barnes countered. "Patterns become evidence." For a moment, neither man spoke, the ambient sounds of the observation deck filling the silence between them. "Why are you really here, Howard?" Gabriel finally asked. Barnes produced a secure tablet, activating it with his thumbprint. Because of this, the screen displayed classified intelligence, a new organization emerging from Daedalus's ashes, led by individuals connected to Eleanor Vance but previously unknown to authorities. Operations in Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, and the Arabian Peninsula suggested someone was reconstructing the network, possibly with inside help. "They're calling themselves Icarus," Barnes explained, apparently learning nothing from their predecessor's mythology. Gabriel studied the intelligence, his analytical mind immediately identifying patterns, connections, vulnerabilities. "You're offering me this operation." "Not offering," Barnes corrected, "warning you about it. The agency believes you should be removed from field operations entirely." "But you disagree," Gabriel surmised. "I believe you're uniquely qualified to dismantle Icarus before it becomes a threat. I also believe it could become personal again, given its connection to Daedalus." The implication was clear. Barnes was giving Gabriel a chance to prove he could separate professional duty from personal vendetta. And if I decline? Gabriel asked. Then I'll respect the psych department's recommendation. Administrative duties in Washington, training the next generation of handlers. Gabriel considered the choices before him. Return to headquarters, to desk duty and training exercises, leaving Icarus for someone else to handle, or return to the field, confronting the resurrection of an organization that had nearly destroyed his life. Who's the primary target? He inquired. Decision already forming. Barnes displayed a photograph of a man in his 50s, distinguished looking with silver temples and calculating eyes. Malcolm Reed, former MI6, discharged under suspicious circumstances, specialized in deep cover operations before transitioning to private intelligence. He was Eleanor Vance's mentor before she joined Daedalus. Gabriel committed the face to memory. Operational parameters, standard intelligence gathering initially, identifying network structure, key personnel, vulnerabilities, no direct engagement without authorization. Barnes emphasized the last point deliberately. Everything by the book, Gabriel. Everything documented. The message was clear. No off-books vendettas this time. When do I start? Gabriel asked. You don't, Barnes replied, surprising him. Not immediately. First, you take 30 days mandatory leave. Clear your head. Process what happened with Audrey, with the agency, with yourself. Then, if our psychological evaluation clears you, operational planning begins. Gabriel wanted to object but recognized the evaluation for what it was, not just a professional requirement, but a personal necessity. The past year had taken him places he had never intended to go, pushed him past limits he had believed immutable. 30 days, he agreed finally. Barnes nodded, satisfied. There's a packet in your hotel room with detailed instructions. Location, cover identity, contact protocols. As Barnes turned to leave, Gabriel asked the question that had been lingering since Daedalus fell. Did you know about my parallel efforts? Barnes paused, considering his response carefully. Let's just say I ensured certain investigations remained focused on their primary objectives. In other words, Barnes had deliberately looked away from evidence of Gabriel's extracurricular activities against Daedalus's leadership. Why? Gabriel pressed. Barnes met his gaze directly. Because 15 years ago, I lost 3 operatives to an operation gone wrong. Their handler did everything by the book, followed every protocol, and they died anyway. Because sometimes the book doesn't account for human malice. The revelation landed like a physical weight. Barnes had lost operatives just as Gabriel had. He understood the particular burden of a handler whose people had died under his protection. The agency needs operatives who follow rules, Barnes continued. But sometimes it needs handlers who understand when rules aren't enough. The trick is knowing the difference. With that, he departed, leaving Gabriel alone with the Singapore skyline and the weight of decisions made and yet to come. 3 days later, Gabriel arrived at a remote property in northern Maine. A cabin on a lake. Isolated enough for solitude but connected enough for security. The vacation package Barnes had arranged included everything needed for 30 days of decompression, supplies, secure communications if needed, and a comprehensive file on Malcolm Reed and the emerging Icarus network. On his first evening, Gabriel stood on the dock watching the sunset paint the lake in fiery colors. In his hand was a sealed envelope he had carried since leaving Singapore. Audrey's final letter delivered through official channels after her sentencing. For hours, he debated whether to read it. What could she possibly say that would matter now? What explanation or justification could change what had happened? Yet something compelled him to open it as darkness settled over the water. Inside was a single page with just a few lines in Audrey's distinctive handwriting. Gabriel, you once asked if any of it was real. The answer is yes. More than I wanted. Less than you deserved. I won't ask forgiveness. We both know some betrayals can't be forgiven. I only want you to know that in the end, I understood exactly who you are. And despite everything, I hope someday you find peace with that knowledge too. Hey. Gabriel read the words twice before methodically tearing the letter into small pieces, watching as they scattered across the dark water, dissolving into the lake like the life he had once believed was his. Inside the cabin he opened the Icarus file, spreading the contents across the rustic table. Photos, intelligence reports, network analysis. The familiar elements of an operation taking shape. Malcolm Reed's face stared up from multiple surveillance images, unaware that he had already been targeted by the man whose operatives had died because of Daedalus. As Gabriel began organizing the information, categorizing threats and identifying vulnerabilities, he felt the familiar analytical focus return. The handler doing what handlers do, protecting assets, neutralizing threats, maintaining the network. But beneath that professional persona, something else stirred. Not the consuming rage that had driven him against Daedalus, but a colder, more focused resolve. Malcolm Reed and Icarus had emerged from the organization that had cost him everything. They represented not just a professional target, but a continuation of a personal reckoning. Gabriel would dismantle Icarus as authorized, following protocols, documenting every action. He would prove to Barnes, to the agency, and to himself that he could separate professional duty from personal vendetta. But as he studied Reed's face, Gabriel acknowledged the truth that Audrey had recognized in her final message. There were parts of himself he had never fully confronted. Capacities for calculation, for patience, for ruthlessness, that went beyond professional training. The betrayal had not created these qualities. It had merely revealed them, stripping away the illusion that his compartmentalized emotional state was a professional tool, rather than his fundamental nature. Gabriel Lynch would never forgive those who betrayed him. He would never forget those who harmed people under his protection, and he would never again pretend to be anything other than exactly what he was. A man whose measured exterior concealed depths that even he had never fully plumbed. As night settled over the Maine wilderness, Gabriel continued his methodical analysis of the Icarus network, already identifying pressure points, vulnerabilities, contingencies. When the 30 days ended, he would return to the field with a clear operational plan. All protocols observed, all procedures followed. What wouldn't appear in any official documentation was the private promise he made as he studied Malcolm Reed's face. That Icarus, like its mythological namesake, was already destined to fall. Not because of agency directives or international law, but because Gabriel Lynch had marked it for destruction. Some handlers protected networks. Some handlers eliminated threats. Gabriel Lynch did both with a precision and determination that his enemies consistently underestimated until it was far too late. The handler's reckoning wasn't over, it had merely evolved. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Take care, good luck. See you in the next video, guys. Goodbye.
After listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind, or maybe it has brought back some old memories. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories, and they connect all of us. Everyone has their own unique journey in life, and we all try to understand the world in our own way. These kinds of moments remind us that we are all human, sometimes happy, sometimes sad, and always learning something new. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it with your friends. Your thoughts and feedback are always valuable to us, as they motivate us to create even better content. Every story has its own unique angle, and our goal is to understand everyone's perspective and make our content diverse and relatable. Stories like these help us realize that life's journey is different for everyone, and by hearing other stories, we learn something new. You can also share your own stories with us. Your experiences are valuable to us as well, and if you enjoyed this video, please leave your feedback. We aim to create content that brightens your mind and gives you new ideas every time. If you've already seen this video before, your feedback is still important. With every piece of feedback, we can improve our content and bring a new perspective to our viewers. Today, what we saw was just a small part of the many stories shared on Reddit and across the world. It's a reminder of how we all try to understand life by sharing our experiences with each other. This video was only an example of how we try to connect with others through storytelling, learning about different sides of life. We hope to continue sharing such stories that help us all learn and grow together. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon. If you haven't already, please like and follow for more amazing content. Your support keeps us going, and we will strive to bring you more thought-provoking and heartwarming stories. Until next time, take care and stay curious. **